Welcome, everyone, and thank you for being here tonight. I'm Mary Beth Gardam for WILPF US, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and our economic justice focus area, Women, Money, and Democracy. And Nancy Price of our Earth Democracy Committee is also here. Her committee is co-sponsoring this webinar with Women, Money, and Democracy. It's fitting that we're gathering on tax day because tonight's conversation is really about a question that tax day puts front and center every year. Who contributes to the common good and who doesn't? This year, it's particularly poignant as we are being drawn into an unjust war that will cost obscene amounts of money and so many young lives. At WILF, we've understood for over a century that peace is never just the absence of war. Real peace, lasting peace, requires justice and balance. It requires that people have homes, that communities have resources, that the wealth of the earth is shared rather than hoarded. You cannot build a peaceful world on a foundation of extreme inequality. History has shown us that over and over again. And yet here we are, living in a moment when a handful of billionaires hold more wealth than the bottom half of humanity combined. Much of that wealth didn't come from working harder or contributing more. It came from owning land, owning financial assets, watching values rise while the rest of us pay rent and taxes on our labor. That's not a law of nature. It's a policy choice, and policy choices can be changed. Tonight, our guest, Alana Hartsock, is going to show us what that change could look like, and more importantly, that it's not utopian, it's practical. Communities and countries have already done it. The tools exist, and they actually work for people and for peace. So I'm genuinely excited for this conversation. I hope you are too. Please hold your questions until Alana asks for them. We'll make time. Let me introduce the newest member of our Women, Money, and Democracy team at WILPF US, Alana Hartsock. Alana is a WILPF member, educator, activist, and lecturer. She's the author of The Earth Belongs to Everyone, which received a Radical Middle Book Award. She delivered the 21st annual E.F. Schumacher lecture called Democracy, Earth Rights, and the Next Economy. I'll put the link to her lecture in the chat. Twice a candidate for U.S. Congress, through the Green Party and the Democratic Party, Alana has worked extensively on economic solutions, including with the UN Habitat's Global Land Tool Network. She's co-director of the Earth Rights Institute and a UN NGO representative of the International Union for Land Value Taxation. She is the architect of Pennsylvania's landmark land value tax reform legislation. Welcome, Alana. Thank you in advance for your presentation.
Oh, thank you, Mary Beth, and thank you so much for your good promotion of this and sponsorship of Women, Money, and Democracy and Earth Democracy committees. And thank you all for being here. So this was the AI generated along with AI that Mary Beth did. She was promoting this. I thought it's such a wonderful image, just fantastic. You could tell a whole big story that I'm talking about just staying on this one slide, but I'll move along. This is the world we want, isn't it? Uh, we had Julie Kabukanyi, believe you pronounce it, with the WILPF Advancing Human Rights Committee chair. And she had an article the other day that was published, Is the United States Experiencing Democracy Fatigue? She says across the United States, citizens are expressing frustration and distrust with politics. Political discourse is deeply polarized. Confidence in institutions is declining. Many feel that the system does not adequately represent their voices or deliver meaningful outcomes. This gap between expectation and experience is at the heart of democracy fatigue. And I'm sure we're all experiencing this to varying degrees. And there's democracy fatigue because democracy was really not fully founded on economic democracy. Uh, how to craft a Liberty Bell that will not crack. We didn't know how to have the metallurgy to craft a bell that would not crack. And we did not have the knowledge or the values as well established as the democracy was. We did not have the vision and values of economic democracy as an underpinning for the political democracy. So consequently, we have a broken and corrupt political democracy. But you can see Chief Little Bear there pointing at the crack. The indigenous people knew a lot about the problem. But also the inscription on the Liberty Bell is the promise, the vision, proclaim liberty throughout all the land and unto all the inhabitants thereof. And that's from the biblical Leviticus 25. And that's really important to go back to some really deep ancient viewpoints and fast forward to what we're experiencing now. So this verse refers to the year of Jubilee. And the year of Jubilee, well, every 7 years was to be a debt cancellation, the Silver Jubilee. Every 7 times 7 plus 1 is 50 years, was to be the debt cancellation, along with the right to return to land that was originally fairly allocated as the promised land. Also, the Jubilee was to then free slaves. So if you have freedom, if you have a full freedom, you need to have rules for fairness. You can't have freedom without fairness. So the Jubilee years were how to have a fair economy, how to have a cohesive society. And that was combined with the vision that there was no need for kings. They didn't envision the need for kings because there was basic fairness, so there could be freedom. So we're going to go deeper into this land problem and the money problem as we go along. But this report, no kings, no billionaire kingmakers either. And Mary Beth mentioned a statistic at the end. And just to draw again our attention to how the billionaire class is funding the political campaigns, and then get who they want in, who will serve them, influencing elections. These are all things we well know. Flooding our elections with money. They're benefiting from a rigged system, corporate tax breaks, gaping loopholes, weak enforcement, policies that let wealth pile up at the top while working people are left behind. But the just unbelievably difficult to comprehend that a few billionaires can control $8.2 trillion in wealth, while families face higher costs for healthcare, housing, and basic necessities. About 50%, half the population of the United States is living paycheck to paycheck. So what is the difference between post-distributive and pre-distributive justice? So the distributive justice conversation does not go deep enough, thus cannot balance and harmonize the principles of fairness, which is usually a dialogue and a value from the left, and freedom on the right. Hence the wide political divide. The system is very good at keeping us divided. Fairness or freedom trade-offs. No, we need maximum freedom and maximum fairness. Post-distributive is when you try to claw back wealth that is already very badly and inequitably distributed. So how do we get the rich to pay more? How do we get a better social safety net because it's a broken net? Those are all problems under what we'd call that post-distributive. What about pre-distributive justice? How do we have values and principles and policies set up fairly from the get-go? Pre-distributive, if the land, labor, and capital factors, primary factors of fundamental economics, are set up fairly to begin with, you shouldn't have this need to claw back from the super rich. That's what we're going to be looking at, a pre-distributive justice. So this is going to go through 4 charts and essentials of economic rent and a war economy. Now, this term rent is the only maybe new usage of the term. It's not like renting a house. It is the unearned income or the surplus value that accrues primarily to the land and resources, the gifts of nature. And that is what the term is. That as we go through this, I hope by the end you'll understand that we're talking about land rent, economic rent. It's a particular category. So here we have a naturally just and harmonious society. Everyone has fair access to the gifts of nature to procure their livelihood. It's indigenous wisdom, isn't it? It's how indigenous people, including our ancestors, survived and thrived in balanced and harmonic cultures. In indigenous societies, we don't have prisons. We don't have some families starving and others well fed. We don't have some homeless and others in mansions. So this is intuitive wisdom. We know that there's in fairness, we get our basic needs met. Now there's two guns. So privilege, what is being going on here? There's suddenly two guns. There is a point of violence between people and the planet, and between the people and the wealth that they create. So I know that some of you are familiar with the idea of the enclosures when land, people were pushed off their common land hundreds of years ago, and then the land was privatized. Once you have full privatization of land, and I'm not saying private use rights, we want to have more people have use of the earth, but it's the profiteering system that sets in with the privatized land system the way we have it. So once you have to pay rent to some landowner, how would they acquire it? By some sort of conquest or plunder. You start having this unearned income, the surplus value, accrue to the few. We're calling that the privilege fund, privilege meaning private law. If you can't make enough money to buy a house because it keeps getting more expensive, you're going to have to take out a mortgage and you're going to pay interest to the banks. So what usually happens is those who have land grabbed and then have this surplus income that they haven't earned, but they managed to grab, they have surplus money to then establish banks, and then they can start profiteering further off of charging interest. So when people must pay rent for access to land, the exploitation of labor begins. Because of this rent leak, people cannot get capital without borrowing from the privilege fund lending system and paying interest. Thinking in Indian. John Mohawk, in his essay, Problem of the Modern World, said when land became a commodity and lost its status as provider and sustainer of life, Western civilization began its history of subjugation and exploitation of the earth and earth-based cultures. For nearly 5 centuries, people have been coerced from their land holdings. The problem in the English-speaking world has its roots in the 16th century. He's talking about the enclosures. 2000 laws passed that pushed the common people off the common land and into impoverishment and into the cities. There are two ways to conquer and enslave a nation, said John Adams. One is by the sword. We'd say that's the land problem. And the other is by debt, the money problem. So now we have a third chart. It's even more full-blown as a system. This privilege fund enables the war system. So collectors of the privilege fund, the unearned income from land resources, the term land always means all natural resources, all the gifts of nature, and interest. They have to protect and keep expanding their wealth out to so-called undeveloped countries, and to quell protests, investors call for military intervention. They are not using their money for the war system. They're using our tax dollars, as we all know. This, if you haven't seen it, it's you can find it online. A very important compilation of about 12 different documentaries the key points. It's called What I've Learned About U.S. Foreign Policy, the War Against the Third World, CIA Covert Operations and U.S. Military Intervention since World War II, What You Didn't Learn in School and Don't Hear on the Mainstream Media. So people that are not familiar about the essence of U.S. foreign policy, have them watch this documentary, and then you can see woven throughout the money problem, the banksters, the land problem, the land and resource grabbers. It's very clear. Now, this comes out of a consciousness, and we've got to have because depending on human consciousness, it's like what we create. We create the rules based on what our consciousness is, if we think they're fair or not. Right now, they're not fair. What kind of consciousness is creating this very unfair and inequitable society? So I like this Jack Forbes, his book on Columbus and the Cannibals, and Paul Livy, Dispelling Wetiko. Now, the native people, when they saw the European settlers come in and grab their land, and they saw the men beating their wives and beating the children, and they were appalled. What kind of people would hurt the women and hurt the children and grab our land and make promises that they didn't keep? So Lakota and other native tribes came up with this word, Wetiko. The Wetiko disease, the sickness of exploitation, has been spreading as a contagion for the past several thousand years. Now we're going back to Roman imperialism and even previously. And the sobering fact that the United States most likely has been responsible since World War II for the deaths of between 20 and 30 million people in wars and conflicts scattered all over the world. So again, Wetiko consciousness it's very separated self, very divided, very hierarchical, power over, it's predatorial, it's trauma inducing, it's ugly. Unity consciousness, where we have a very deep understanding and appreciation of being connected and interrelated to each other in all of life. So unity consciousness is very different than Wetiko. And I believe those of us here are unity consciousness people. And we are struggling to find a path that has a society that feels connectedness, unity, and diversity. It's circular, it's holistic, it's healing, it's beautiful. The true, the good, the beautiful, those eternal values. So this is a consciousness shift that we're moving through right now, and we're longing to shift our political economics into a way that reflects the connectedness of life. So now this is a fourth slide. You notice it's very different. That privilege fund that came from the unearned income, the profiteering and land and resources and money, the guns are gone. This is really a new form of governance. We could call it an earth rights democracy. And that privilege fund that grew into the war economy is now acknowledged as being created by a fund of value, and we use money to value things. So it's a fund of money from land and natural resources that's created by nature and society that's now returned to society because it's the ours. The earth is ours. It's for ours to share. And this resource rent fund, previously an unearned income to the few, is now a socially created value returned to society as a whole. This then becomes our public finance base. We're going to go into how that works in the remainder of this conversation. But just to note that there's a land problem and a money problem. Often people who see the money problem not very well aware of the land problem, and the land problem people maybe don't often go deeply enough into the money problem, but they're both interconnected. We have to acknowledge that the money is a symbol of wealth. However, if it's gold, if it's silver, it's paper. You can't eat it, you can't drink it. It's not wealth, it's a symbol of wealth. The only way that the money system can be controlled and there can be this debt usury system grow from the symbol system is this prior land enclosure. So the privilege fund is now equitably returned to society by the public collection of the land and resource rents, and workers with their just economic opportunities restored, can now accumulate capital through their own savings. Economic justice, abundance, and peace are restored. We're going to go into these terms a little bit about land factor and capital and interest. So this is a three-factor economics. This is a perennial wisdom teaching that was brought forward by the American political economist who became quite well known at the end of the 1800s, and a large movement formed, Henry George, when he wrote his book, Progress and Poverty, because of his question, why, as our type of society grows and develops, why, and he saw this in his life, why does the wealth gap grow? Why doesn't everybody prosper more equitably? So again, the images, you can see that devil-looking Wetiko consciousness on the left and the unity peace consciousness on the right. Very different felt experiences of these two images. So comments, questions, concerns at this point from anyone? We can take a few minutes. If not, we'll move along to, again, this term pre-distributive justice, where money, land, and tax system is fairly established. So that extreme wealth inequality is not even possible. That's where we want to go. I would say if we could get wealth inequality to 10 to 1, the richest is 10 times more than the poorest, that would be pretty good distribution of wealth instead of the extreme that we have now. Debt jubilee. Henry George, mentioned in his last book, The Science of Political Economy, advocated for abolishing laws enforcing private debt collection, viewing it as a way to foster higher moral character in commerce, reduce the burden on courts, create a more stable economy by limiting speculative credit, and promoting business based on genuine standing rather than debt. He believed this debt jubilee would relieve society from crippling obligations, leading to greater economic soundness, similar to historical clean slate traditions that prevented mass impoverishment. Many of you are already expert and well aware of the money problem and what to do about it, so I won't spend a lot of time with this, but wanted to segue from the money problem, which is going beyond the private debt, public debt. Henry George also supported the idea of periodic cancellation of public debt, echoing ideas from figures like Thomas Jefferson to prevent future generations from being burdened by past financial obligations, which he saw as destabilizing for nations. In essence, George saw debt cancellation not as a handout, but as a structural reform to create a healthier, more ethical, and less crisis-prone economic system, ultimately aligning with a broader philosophy of land value taxation to address societal inequality. And we'll be going through the land value tax shortly. Key arguments for debt cancellation, and again, this is perennial wisdom teaching. This is Jubilee justice. So you have moral improvement, economic stability, judicial relief, and historical precedent. So he did draw parallels to ancient traditions of debt cancellation jubilees that restored economic balance and prevented perpetual debt servitude. Many of you already know about the public banking movement, your advocacy for it. Nonprofit banks with a depository bank charter that the public owns through their representative government and that works to benefit local communities. Public finance funds, our taxes, are deposited in the public bank until dispersed, and infrastructure loans are available for public needs and other loans. So when the government can borrow from its public fund, it doesn't have to pay these high interest rates to Wall Street. When this public fund and others can contribute to local public banks, they can bank with a local public bank, then you again have a source of low interest loans for housing and establishing small businesses. So it's all about low interest loans and debt cancellation, no usury. So publicbankinginstitute.org operated in the public interest through institutions owned by the people through their representative governments. It could be a city or town government, state government, federal. Public banks can exist at all levels, city, state, national. Any government body that can meet local banking requirements may theoretically create such a financial institution. And as you know, there's a Bank of North Dakota. The state of North Dakota is a very well functioning, long-time public bank. It's our one major working model. So now moving into human rights, there's the International Declaration of Human Rights, and then there's the International Declaration of Economic Human Rights that both came out of the United Nations, the work of Eleanor Roosevelt and so forth. But guess what? Even though there's the right to employment, to food, to shelter, a multitude of rights, there is in neither document the right to the earth itself, the absolute source of all created wealth is not established as a human right. It's curious, isn't it? I've been told that that was a third rail. You didn't want to talk about the rights to the earth. It just was too touchy a topic. But if you take a moment and you look around wherever you're sitting and you look at every item and just reflect for a minute that all the stuff around you was pulled out of the earth, whether it's paper from the trees, metal from the ground. It's all human hands and human mind working up the stuff of the earth. And yet we don't have any earth rights ethic. We have an environmental sense of taking care of the earth, April 22nd, Earth Day. But the original Earth Day was the equinox, the March equinox. John McConnell was the founder of the Earth Day, and he wanted it. It was on the equinox, equal balance, harmony, day and night. And he was a proponent of the economics that I'm talking about tonight. So the rights to the earth and the rights of the earth, the human right to the earth, did not carry through when those who were planning a environmental teach-in in April heard John talking about Earth Day, and they thought, oh, that's a great phrase. We're going to call our environmental teach-in Earth Day. That's the one we know about, although some of us and the Peace Bell at the United Nations for almost 50 years has been wrong at the exact moment of equinox to keep that original Earth Day in mind. So here's some tax quotes. I don't know, should I read? Let's read the first one. I like this Thomas Jefferson one. To compel a man to furnish funds for the propagation of ideas he disbelieves and abhors is sinful and tyrannical. I mean, we want peace. We yearn for peace. How many are paying for war? Isn't that a terrible contradiction in our lives? To feel that we must pay for what we don't believe in. I've seen more in the last couple of days, more emails are coming in about people protesting paying their taxes into the federal government. And that is going to only increase. I don't personally see the opportunity emerging that we really can reform this very thoroughly corrupted federal government. I believe we're going to really need to strongly decentralize and strengthen local people, economies, and communities. So a few more of these quotes. Power to tax is the power to destroy. And yet the next one is, I hate paying taxes, but I love the civilization they give me. Well, don't we need public goods? Don't we need libraries and schools? Don't we need infrastructure, roads, and so on? So what is the best form of tax is what we're going to be looking at. A fair tax, a tax that is pre-distributive justice. Ron Paul says one thing is clear, the founding fathers never intended a nation where citizens would pay nearly half of everything they earned to the government. Jean-Baptiste Colbert, the art of taxation consists of plucking the gooses to obtain the most feathers with the least hissing, kind of funny. Turgot, the expenses of government having for their object the interests of all, which they should be borne by everyone. And the more a man enjoys the advantages of society, the more he ought to hold himself honored in contributing to these systems. One phrase that fits with this is pay taxes for what you take from earth, from shared resources, not with what you make from your mental and physical labor. But this Anne Robert Jacques Turgot was a physiocrat when the King of France was trying to understand how wealth was distributed in France because the people were getting very, very disturbed. And so Turgot and the other physiocrats looked at the problem because they were doctors, medical doctors, physicians, who understood the flow of blood through the body. So the king thought maybe they'll understand the flow of wealth through France. And they were one of those that rediscovered this wisdom teaching about don't tax burden the people, tax the land, tax the land as so few hold. Well, that was a little beyond what the aristocrats wanted to do. You had the French Revolution, and the king was chopped off their head, guillotines. So we want to get smart so that we can have a very fundamental change without the violence of previous revolutions. Benjamin Franklin, in this world, nothing can be said to be certain except death and taxes. Well, we've heard that before. And then my one that's kind of funny, Snoopy says, Dear IRS, I'm writing to you to cancel my subscription. Please remove my name from your mailing list. Well, we mentioned Henry George, and this was his masterwork, Progress and Poverty, that immediately launched him to quite a lot of acclaim. He toured throughout the United States. Large numbers of people came out. Ireland, England, Australia. This movement just generated so much interest because it answered the people's questions about wealth inequality. So he said, is it not enough that men should vote? It's not enough that they be theoretically all men created equal before the law. They must have liberty to avail themselves of the opportunities and means of life. They must stand on equal terms with reference to the bounty of nature, the earth. So some terms that are really key here. Labor, we know what labor is. Mental and physical. On land, which is all the gifts of nature, yields capital. Now, we're not talking money capital. We're not talking finance capital. We're thinking wealth used that helps labor create more wealth. So it's capital as tools, enables more wealth to be created by labor. Think a shovel. What shovel? It's a bit of wood from trees. It's a bit of metal from the earth. You work that up into a shovel, there's your capital, helps you create more wealth. Basic needs can be secured with minimal capital. And think frontier times in the United States. Think indigenous people. Think, how did all of our ancestors survive? They weren't capital intensive societies, but they had access to the gifts of nature. I like to think of it as birdonomics. Just think, a little bird with just a little bird brain and two little feet, can claim a place, a location to put the nest and go out and get twigs and create this wonderful, perfect nest for its bird family. And then it can go and get the food it needs for its little bird. And guess what? It's all free. There's no rent and no mortgage. That is natural law. And we can get back to understanding natural law. So we had these three factors we just went through: land, labor, and capital. That's classical economics that then with Henry George came to really understand how to address wealth inequality. But Henry George's economics were corrupted. They were corrupted the early 1900s. It was, I call it the intellectual crime of the last century. So what we have is called neoclassical economics with only two factors, just labor and capital. Land factor, which is the earth's resources, was made a subset of capital. Capital, there's your hammer. but the earth itself is just a subset of capital. That is what is neoclassical economics. That is what people learn in the schools of economics. And in fact, they paid off universities to create, they being the super rich, to create neoclassical economics, to obfuscate and obscure this fundamental economic understanding and the ethic of fairly sharing the gifts of nature. It was going to cut into their big money profits. It was going to eliminate the billionaire and the multi-billionaire class. It was a big threat. Some say that this understanding brought forth by Henry George was more of a threat to the United States wealthy class than Karl Marx. You've heard of Karl Marx, you hardly ever heard of Henry George. When the factor of land is reduced to a subset of capital, what happens to this concept of rent? Now, rent is that value that accrues to land and natural resources as society becomes more complex, as population grows, as you have infrastructure and schools and all these things about a complex society that we have, that land value increases. In fact, that's the root cause of our housing problem. The land value is increasing faster, and hence the housing cost, faster than wages. Something called the law of rent. It's immutable, the law of rent. So what happens to this concept of rent, which is the now privatized value of land and resources? Verschwindet, I love that German word, disappeared. The income, the rent, which is an unearned income, it magically and perhaps conveniently disappears from the economic lexicon and praxis. You don't have to talk about things like who owns the earth, who gets its value. It's simply not there in classical economics. Now, let's take a little time to, this is like a composite graph. Colleagues in Australia put this together. So it goes a century, 1910 to 2010. And the blue is the earnings from wages, labor, and legitimate capital production. So you see it's pretty high when it begins compared to now the yellow, which is this unearned income, the rent, the land and natural resource rent. And then you have the orange, and it's the taxes. Now, the taxes have come to fall on, for the vast majority, on labor and production, on work. We kind of put those two together, capital and labor, because labor is produced by land and labor. So we're not talking financial capital. So the return to our wages and our legitimate earnings starts shrinking. And then it shrinks even more because that's what we're taxing. We're now taxing the people on their earned income. But meanwhile, the unearned income, the rent, keeps increasing and it gets away with very little taxation. Now, if you can visualize how that will increase wealth inequality, kind of makes it clear, I hope. And what we're getting at here is that orange band, that's the taxes on earned income. We should eliminate that, get working people the full return for their efforts, their earned income, take the taxes off the earned income. The yellow band is where we want to draw the public finance fund. And it increases as society evolves and grows, the population. But instead of driving wealth inequality, then we move into a fair society where the unearned income from land and resources keeps getting recycled back to the people. Nobody's a predator that takes this unearned income. It's understood as created by nature and society. It belongs, it's the us, it's the we, it's the ours. Who wants to make a killing in real estate? Wonderful phrase, always makes me ill to think that there's the psychology that wants to make a killing in real estate. They want to profit from the earth's land and resources. They think it's a really fun game, and it's a legal game, but it's an immoral game. So we can build a system of public finance that will strengthen and maximize incentives for, I call this hatching five birds out of one egg, fair distribution of wealth, environmental protection, efficient wealth production, provision of adequate government services, peaceful resolution of territorial conflicts. That's a whole session in itself, but we'll touch on it because we're all about peace, peace and freedom. Okay, how do we get all these five good things? By sharing this commons rent, which is the unearned income, and that was a phrase that Adam Smith used a bit, or surplus value. Really, same thing. Karl Marx's phrase. That is the profit from the gifts of nature. You can start getting a hint here about the artificial distinction between Adam Smith and Karl Marx once you start looking at the land problem. There was a certain agreement between the two. How powerful can that be in bringing together right and left? So Ecclesiastics biblically says, the profit of the earth is for all, a wisdom teaching. So what are we going to get the commons rent from? Well, very huge amounts are from simply our surface land sites based on the land value. So we're not talking about all agricultural land. No, we're talking about the very, very high valued land sites in our cities and towns. And if probably where just about everybody lives, if you live in a city or town, you'll know that there are underutilized land sites, boarded up buildings, land that's just covered with weeds. Why isn't it getting getting put to good use? Because we're not collecting this land rent on its value in order to get the incentive so that the so-called owner either does something useful or sells it to somebody who can. So, okay, we're looking at these natural resource domains, oil and minerals. What is this whole, what the war system about for ages? Oil, minerals, grabbing those, profiteering from corporations, getting control. We've seen that continually, and it's under our noses right now. Venezuela and Iran uh, gains to control oil, water. We have to be very careful about the systems that want to privatize and profit from water. So any land, farmland, timberland, grazing land, but it's based on its value. Electromagnetic spectrum, that's land. That's a gift of nature. We have a few corporations that have grabbed key parts of the electromagnetic spectrum. They should be charged rent. They should be paying rent to use the spectrum. And then even these geo-orbital zones, high land value in outer space between Earth and Moon, where you can put a satellite balance between Earth and the Moon's gravitational field. That's high real estate in outer space is getting rather cluttered with satellites. We should be charging rent for that. So commons rent public finance removes taxes from, now we just said we should collect taxes, which is actually a commons rent from these resource domains. And now we want to remove it from wages and other earned income, from productive and sustainable capital. Let these small, wonderful businesses, let them thrive. There are people that love to run small businesses. They give services and goods to the community. It's not the same as a corporation that hogs land and resources. Well, sales. Why are we having sales taxes? Especially sales taxes on food. Some places tax your food. Well, they tax your houses through the property tax upside down. So we don't want to tax our homes and other buildings. This is the upside down property tax. You fix up your house and you're supposed to report an increase in value and therefore higher property tax. There are places in cities where people make the outside of their home look very shabby. And the neighborhood, they like it to look run down. But inside, they're fixing up their houses and they can look quite nice. They don't want to draw attention to the tax collector. They don't want to pay more taxes. What a terrible disincentive that is. We need housing. Don't tax it. So there's the how much are billions of dollars of our tax dollars from our earned income, as many of you would know, we're just giving away subsidies to energy companies, these resource extraction corporations, any kind of big businesses and industry. It's not small business getting these subsidies. It's all the big ones, the agribusiness, not the small farmers. Weapons of mass destruction. That's a subsidy. That's a subsidy to something called the military industrial complex. Take it away, eliminate it. Yeah, I did that. I got to go back the other way. Okay. Now, these different, what we could call public finance tiers or domains, we can envision them, and there are examples of local to global. So, a local tier would collect the commons rent via the land value tax from surface land values. Sites for homes, business, industrial activities are well suited to finance public goods and services of cities and towns. In rural areas, surface land value tax has potential for non-coercive land reform, for affordable land, for regenerative agriculture, small farms, and revitalized rural culture. We'll have an example of that later on. Regional, state, or in some cases, national, if it's a small nation, governmental institutions may be tasked to collect user, which is like a lease fees, from the commons used for oil and mineral extraction, forestry, water resources. I know in the state of Alabama, it's one of our badly unequal states. Alabama has very large forest companies owning forest land, very low taxes on them, and access to water resources. A global resource agency is needed to collect and distribute the use or lease fees for the transnational commons. This would include royalties on fish and minerals from the oceans. We had this law of the seas at the United Nations level, but endorsed but not implemented. Again, electromagnetic spectrum, these geostationary orbit zones. Comments, questions, concerns. In the next section, I'm going to give policy examples. Any questions, comments, or concerns at this point? You have to unmute. That's Cheryl. See Cheryl's
Yes,
hand up.
I see you talking about the rural areas in one of these tiers. I think are we not suffering from the fact that people don't want to work on farms? That we've had to import workers from other countries. So
You know,
why would people want to be working on these farms? What?
I I guess we have to hold two things together at once. One is when you import workers and you're talking about big farms that have monotonous routine labor, just picking fruit or vegetables, the same thing all day long, or just picking in the field. You're bent over, you're picking in the field. And then hold that beside the image of a small, beautiful, organic farm. I know a lot of younger people who really want to have land access for small organic farms. All right, they really do. Um, it's an affordability issue right now. It's hard to buy any land, and you can produce a lot on even a couple of acres, 5 acres, 10 acres of organic, good, excellent produce. So I do know there's a lot of young people, and I know there's a lot of people who are doing jobs that are, I want to say, soul draining, that are kind of dead end, meaningless. There's a lot of people with meaningless jobs out there that would thrive to be out and be creatively working with nature and growing food. So that is the case as well. All right. All right, so we already went there. How did I get? So, okay, examples. Uh, okay, now examples of commons rent from surface land. And one place to start is property tax reform, whereby taxes are shifted from what we want more of, like housing, local owned businesses, and onto the value of the land, which is a commons created by nature and the community as a whole. Small steps in this direction have been taken by several towns and cities in the state of Pennsylvania. For instance, Harrisburg, wonderful example. It was the second most distressed city in the United States in the 1970s. Only East St. Louis was worse than Harrisburg. So, city council, they were desperate what to do. So, they heard about this tax reform and they began shifting their property tax off of the houses and onto the land value. What resulted was the 4,000 boarded up buildings. Those building owners, it's just a speculation holding land and a boarded up building. You pay very little property tax. But when you shift it to land value, those owners either have to become people who organize labor and capital and repair those buildings, or they sell it to somebody who can, has the skills and the interest to do so. So then the city's about 50,000. It went from 4,000 boarded up buildings to less than 400 in just a few years. They shifted to 6 times more property tax on the land value than on the building. So we have to be careful when people say, let's get rid of property tax. We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We want to do the shift onto the land value. Otherwise, we're just going to further support land speculation and land hoarding and all these bad things. So Harrisburg did it right. They had many benefits. There's several more. There was a decrease in arson, an increase in jobs. The city had a better budget. They were able to pay for expanding their park system. So Allentown's the third largest city in Pennsylvania now. It's an interesting story. It's the only that I know of, city that I know of, where the citizens voted for this tax. They voted to freeze all the other local taxes and only use the land value tax. And if they were having additional taxes needed, it was to come only from this land value. Uh, they voted it in, and then there was controversy among the few that were going to pay more. These are speculative types, and they wanted another vote. So they called a whole new vote, and the citizens voted it in a second time. So, based on their home rule charter, the city was able to fully go ahead with it and started getting their own city turned around. You have infill development instead of urban sprawl. You have the ability to finance infrastructure, so on. Pittsburgh, the state's second largest city, had for many decades this kind of tax. They was known for really good affordable housing indicators. But then what happened was the city council over the years was replaced. Of course, it's new city council members, and the new ones didn't understand how this worked. And then they paid up private assessors to assess. They were behind in their assessments. And it looked like they were maybe going to, oh, if you have the full land value assessment, the taxes are going to go up enormously. Well, they didn't listen to the advice that you just have to lower the percentage on that land value. No problem. So because they went back on it, we were able to see the difference between when they had the affordable housing and when it was less so, based on whether or not they had the tax. So another example is the whole city state of Singapore. So a land lease public finance example. The land lease of public land and community land trust can address the homeless crisis. I think I have another slide about Singapore, talk a little bit more about that. Powerful land reform in California was a result of the Right Act that enabled local districts to issue bonds to pay for irrigation infrastructure. That increased the land value, and the bonds were paid off by a land value tax. And 1 million acres of land owned by just one rancher was broken into over 7,000 small farms. But the movement was thwarted by big banks who wanted to have the first debt lien on the land instead of the local community. This is why we know that the land and the money problem should really be solved in tandem. So I told a little bit about Harrisburg. So you had all these billions of dollars of investments occurred. Taxable properties went up. Residential units increased. Vacant structures fell by 80%. Crime rate dropped. Okay. So Harrisburg generally considered a good place to live. It's praised for its affordability, strong job market, especially in government, healthcare, education, quality of life, and convenient location. Offers an urban suburban mix with diverse neighborhoods and access to nature. It's now notable for affordable housing and a lower cost of living compared to many East Coast cities, with amenities like restaurants, parks, cultural activities, making it appealing for families, professionals, and retirees. So again, back to this California Right Act. It's so interesting what happened here. A man who was a teacher ran for the state legislature. He understood this Henry George economics, land policy, and so he got this Right Act passed. So then the localities could use land value tax to pay for the infrastructure they needed. Can you imagine one landowner, Henry Miller, owned 1 million acres. But now, once you brought in a land value tax and the irrigation, he started selling off acres and acres of land, and it became affordable for the small farmers who wanted access. Also, thriving communities grew up around these areas, and they were very diverse, unlike some of the corporate farming communities. This beautiful, successful policy was nullified by Supreme Court rulings brought about by big banking institutions. See, the banks want to collect the land rent, and then they want to be in a situation where they can collect the mortgage interest. That's how the two work together. Okay, so here's an image. What is that? This is Singapore. It's called the Green Biophilic Public Housing. Can you imagine amazing public housing looking like that? Look how everybody has some sunshine. Look at all the green space around it. Look at the rooftops. City-state of Singapore has a land lease system. All the land is owned by the government. Individual use rights are given upon payment of land rent, and the lease payments fund government services and other public goods without them putting taxes on their labor and production. So it's a really good model. Many of us who are really concerned about the homeless issue, most every town and city has actual ownership of some land that's underutilized or vacant. The city actually has some land that could be used for homeless people. For a motto I love is ecological villages, like these emerald villages and tiny houses and gardens. And so the city shouldn't sell off these lands. It should simply lease these lands at a reasonable fee and then not charge people on their labor, whoever is living on theirs. So you have a functional type of free enterprise zone, but you don't have the land speculation problem that happened with other types of free enterprise zones. So think about that if you want to work with homeless issues, how you could do a land lease system. So here's regional and state resource authorities examples. Constitution of the state of Alaska declares that the mineral resources of Alaska belong to the citizens of the state on an equal basis. The Alaska Permanent Fund issues annual direct dividend checks from the oil rent to each person, including children residing in the state, for at least 1 year. That annually is about 2,000 to 3,000 per person, including children, it just said. Okay, so in October, if you've been living in Alaska for a year, you will get in the mail a check about 2,000 or more dollars for however many members in your family. So say there's 4 people in your family, you're going to get at least $8,000. That's a significant additional income. But all this information is on their website, pfd.alaska.gov. So another regional example is excellent is the Delaware River Basin Commission. It's a breakthrough in water resource management, formed in 1961 when President Kennedy and the governors of Delaware, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and New York signed concurrent compact legislation into law, creating this regional body with the force of law to oversee a unified approach to managing a river system without regard to political boundaries. So you manage a river system this way. You could also manage any natural resource system in a similar manner. But before they had like four different states with all these different rules. It was very complex, and they just streamlined it and made one commission. So Commons Rent Public Finance, a way to resolve resource wars and conflicts. For an Earth Rights Policy Proposal, see Israel-Palestine Cutting the Gordian Knot. That's an article I wrote. It's on my Substack. I'd love you to look at it. If people could just see each other as human beings, maybe they could create a shared resource authority. Israel, Palestine, Jordan, those little tiny states, Lebanon, they're like Massachusetts and Connecticut, New Jersey. These are small states, right? And Israel has extreme wealth inequality, not to mention the horrors of what's been happening there with the Palestinians. But there would be a way to share the land and resources and begin to have functional societies and a fair wealth distribution system based on sharing the land, the water, and then even the sacred sites. So earth-sharing policies build in economics for a peaceful planet. But of course, we must agree that we are all human beings having an equal right to exist. That's your unity consciousness. A Wetiko consciousness says, you people don't have a right to exist. You are subhuman. So you get the importance that as people of consciousness understand the connectedness of life, need to come forward and implement policies based on that consciousness. So we have amazing technology that can implement the system now. Here's a map of the land values of the United States. The red and the dark red, the high land values are in the urban areas. You can see that it matches to the big population areas, Chicago and New York, Boston, San Francisco, Southern California. The dark red spots are the cities. That's where we got to really go to have decent life and no poverty in our cities. But we have the technology that can really map this out. There is on Rumble, posted on Rumble, a video on colonialism, land value maps, and land value taxation. So we all know what colonialism means. You grab the land and resources of people out there. But Martin Luther King talked about domestic colonialism. And what we found, say, when we look at this detail, and this shows that you can see each plot of land, who owns it, how much is it valued at, is it fair neighborhood to neighborhood, is it fair value assessment? Where does that money go when you're a renter? What we found out that in the poorest neighborhoods, the rent, which includes the land rent, but they're building also, but the rent is going out to the richer neighborhoods, the richer areas. So that's domestic colonialism. We can use this land value mapping to implement the policy and really understand who's going to pay more with this system, who's going to pay less, publicly, transparently available, all the information. People can understand exactly what the game is and how to make it work for everybody. So the basic ethic is the earth belongs to everyone, equal rights to our planet as a birthright, the earth our birthright. So here's a few links. You're welcome to join our Earth Rights movement. The international one is at theiu.org, International Union for Land Value Taxation. It's so gratifying to me to be on a Zoom call with our executive directors from all continents, all five continents, and they all have the same vision and value, and we're all working for the same. But we can share with differences happening in our different countries. So our national organization, Common Ground USA. And on that website, there's a speakers bureau. And then I have my book, The Earth Belongs to Everyone. There's a free PDF at thattheiu.org/books. There's my email. There's my phone. I want anybody who's interested in this. I'll link you up with people in your city or your state that are working for this. And if you can put a little bit of time, you're going to see some real results in claiming the earth for everybody and solving the wealth inequality and war problem right here. So, questions. Somebody says excellent and detailed and destructive, and the local initiatives to counter didn't catch all of that. So please, questions and comments. This I learned this decades ago when I was trying to understand the causes of wealth inequality, poverty, and war. And I took it as a 5-week course, 2 hours a week. And my mind just was blown. It was like economic enlightenment. I couldn't talk about anything else once I got this. And a lot of people have this experience. Some people take it as a 10-week course. It's not rocket science. It's easy to understand, but it takes a little time and attention. And usually there's important questions. You don't necessarily kind of get it all right away. I have tried to condense the key points in a very short period of time, hoping that we'll keep working together and linking the money and the land problem and the war and peace problem. So thank you for your time. I really appreciate that you all could be here.
We have some questions in the chat, Alana. Virginia Hammond, my friend from Portland, Oregon, says if the incentive is to develop land to a highest use to cover taxes, how that balances with nature's need, fallow, recreational, and forest.
Well, let's just keep it at the city level to begin with. Well, the short answer is zoning. This doesn't nullify human beings saying, we want residential here, this here, but we want open space here. That is a zoning land use decision. But once that decision's made, you're going to be different kind of land values. We're trying to make sure there's not profiteering in land values. But the community should come together as it does with zoning regulations. And more people might want to get involved with zoning to have the kind of zoning you want. The other thing about parks in cities is if you have a city with no parks, you don't have a very appealing or attractive city. But you have a city with a lot of green space. And I mentioned Singapore, there could have been more pictures. Singapore is a very highly developed city with lots of beautiful parks and green space. So the more beauty of the nature nearby actually increases the land value. Those who live nearest to Central Park in New York City have higher land value than those who live further from Central Park. So you see it over and over again. A city that integrates nature with the built environment has plenty of the land rent from the human use areas to finance their cities.
So it sounds like you're saying that if we want to work on this in our cities, we should be advocating for it at the zoning board or the city council level. Is that right?
Zoning is a land use decision. So you don't need to get involved with zoning unless you're somebody who thinks we should have a different kind of land use. So there's the environmental land use issue, and then there's the fairness in this land access, land value issue. So the involvement is with the city level, with the city council, to get a group of people, ideally, and we can get you the really nicely described information about how this works and present that to your city council. And also know that there's people with expertise who can do the number crunching to show the city leaders how this will work, particularly in their area, who pays more, who pays less, how it would work. But some states need enabling legislation. They need on the state level, like when I moved back to Pennsylvania, the boroughs, the small towns, were not permitted to do this tax reform. So I had to work through the legislature and build a coalition to have an amendment to the code for the boroughs so that now the boroughs could do it. Virginia, we just found out that just passed legislation that's enabling 4 cities in Virginia to move ahead as kind of like pilot projects in doing this. And Kentucky just passed legislation that enables Kentucky cities to do so. So I would have to check based on the state that people live in, if you could just go ahead and start working at the town or city level, or if you need to work with people to get it passed, something passed legislation on the state level, Mary Beth. Is that clear enough? Not yet.
I think so. Lucille in Illinois asks, I must be ignorant to miss this, but I don't get what exactly a land value tax is or how it is calculated, both theoretically and in our existing contexts. So
Well,
what do you actually mean by a land value tax?
well, you know what a property tax is, right? I don't need to explain that, do I?
No,
Okay.
but how does the land value
Yeah. So a
tax
property
differ?
tax is a tax on the house and on the land. So you gotta calculate the land value and then the housing value, house value, and you add them together and you put a percentage on that amount, and that's your property tax. What the split rate tax is understands that property tax is good and bad tax. We say, don't tax your house, your improvements. We need more housing. So take that property tax on the value of your house, remove that entirely, shift it instead on the value of the land only. So it's an assessed value of the land site, which everybody who pays a property tax, they have an assessed value of their land in a record somewhere. So we just take a percentage, as in any property tax, it's a percentage of the value, but we just put it on the land value because the understanding is that the land value is not an individually created, produced value. It first is nature given site, surface land. That's easy to understand. But even more so, it's socially created. What do I mean by that? If 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 you go way out into urban area, I mean rural area, you're going to find an acre of land valued at less than a city block in the urban area. So land value is created by people coming together, working together, cooperating, businesses growing, schools growing, roads being put in, all the infrastructure, libraries. That is a socially created value. All people want to live, if they have children, they usually want to live closer to schools. They don't want to live far away from schools. So that creating a higher land value closer to that amenity of a school, library. So the more amenities that a town has, the higher the land value because it becomes a more attractive place to live. These values, that value is created by society. So if it accrues to individuals, it's unearned. So these real estate investment companies look all around the country and the world and they say, oh, is there going to be a nice new road put in, some kind of infrastructure? Oh, we better go and grab up some of that land because once that road gets put in, there's going to be a higher value in it. So they're going to capture that unearned income just because they grabbed the land site. So we don't want people to make a killing in real estate. The value is created by nature and society. Thus, it's ours. It's a commons. So I interchangeably use the terms land value tax, but it's not really like a tax as a burden. It is a sharing of this commons, this socially created commons of land value, which we call
So
rent.
if the land value is known as a commons, who actually owns it?
Oh, that's why we publicly capture it through the tax system. It's shared value. We share that value. We still own the what's it's like any property. A ownership is not totally exclusive. If you don't pay your property tax, you could lose your property, correct? So it's always conditional. So who owns it? Well, the idea is that we all own, shared the value. How do we share that practically? We capture it. Everybody pays into the common fund based on the commons rent. And that therefore secures our right of tenure, our use right. It's based on what's a fair use right.
So then the land right is actually more like you're renting the land, you're not owning it as an individual,
Your
right?
title still says you own it, but the condition of holding that title is that you pay that rent to the public finance fund. But now we're paying property tax mostly on the house
Right.
and the public finance fund. And we say that's unethical and it's creating housing shortages, and the increase in lack of affordable housing is because we're treating the land right now as a market commodity. Buy, sell, profiteer, speculate. The thing is, we cannot continue to treat Mother Earth as a market commodity. Mother Earth is under our feet, and we can't create more land. So it becomes a sharing of the gifts of nature through this rather elegant public finance methodology. Now, there have been different ways to share the land. I've looked at it over thousands of years, different cultures. The Chinese, for a time, had like a tic-tac-toe plan, the tic-tac-toe, 9 squares. And they had the center square was their shared center community space. But then they had around that shared space, they had 9 plots that were individually and family designated for family use rights.
Tina wants to know, are there folks using this to create fairness in school funding?
It depends on where. In Pennsylvania, we need the legislation to enable the school funding districts to do this reform. There's only 8 localities that permit it right now, and the boundaries of your municipal governance needs to be coterminous, meaning it needs to be the exact same boundaries as the school district, and usually they're different. But now the reason we had such high hopes for this coming into Philadelphia, our major city, such a big, important city, is that is the case. Their school district boundary is the same boundaries as their city boundaries. They could have done the whole shift. And we had massive numbers of people wanting to have this happen. And there was a president of a city council at the time when the movement looked really promising. But she had the district in Philadelphia, I think it was Chevron Oil. It was one of the oil refinery areas, which was a polluted mess, poor land use, and her district was going to pay more. So very unfortunately, she had the power to thwart the whole thing. And see, again, we're seeing this excessive power of a land and resource corporation that prevented this good policy from happening in Philadelphia.
Okay. Well, Tina is from Philadelphia, so I'm sure that answer helped her.
Well,
Uh,
good, because I can send her an article I just came across today. There's a Russell Ritchie in Philadelphia who really has done a lot of work in Philadelphia on this, and he just published an article. So I'd like to make sure she gets this.
I'll
So
send you her email. Ricky in Vermont says, I'm intrigued by the idea of a city doing land lease for homeless housing, but how is land lease connected to land value tax?
well, it's just okay. If you're leasing land, you're paying a use fee, and a land value tax is essentially a use fee. Uh, your site is more valuable depending on where it's located, and you would pay a higher land value tax if you have a better location than somebody else. So the land lease system, you're still paying something for your land into the public fund for secure tenure. secure access to that bit of land. So see, if a city would just simply say, yes, here, and we know we have community land trust models for this. So you get a template of a community land trust model, you decide on the parcel, and you say, listen, we have a homeless problem. There's a lot of nonprofits and churches and so on that would want to raise funds for some buildings to be built. So can we have access based on simply paying a land lease fee? The community land trust movement grew out of this whole economics that I'm talking about by people who thought, oh, changing the taxes seems like a big, hard thing to do. Let's have small experiments where we have land used in such a way that we cannot profiteer or land speculate in land and therefore keep it affordable. That is the origination of the community land trust movement. So what we're talking with the land value taxes is another thing. It's like we want all the land to be held in trust. It's a way to have your whole city be a land trust where people are free and untaxed to create the wealth they need, build the buildings they need, fix up their houses, but eliminate the speculation and land hoarding by paying a fair use fee back to the government to be of service to the people as a whole through the public finance system.
I like
It's a
the idea of what did you call it? Like a template project that's small enough to test and make sure that it's viable within the city. I think that would help people feel more comfortable about how it could work.
well,
John Howell asks, can you give examples of how the property taxes actually changed with the switch to land value taxation?
I thought there were two questions there. One is sort of examples. I did want to mention Square One villages that grew out in Oregon, and they have a number of these formerly homeless people now nicely held in essentially community land trust. The one model I really love that they have is called Emerald Village. So if you go to Square One Villages and Emerald Village, and they have videos of how happy people are. They finally have a safe place to live and they're really well functional and they have little gardens and they have their community center. What a great model, and it is expanding. Now, the other one was about the property tax. Run that by me again.
He said, can you give examples of how the property taxes actually changed with the switch to land value taxation? Do they go up? Do they go down? How does it
Oh,
work?
okay.
Is that it? Is that what you meant, John? I didn't want to speak for you, but
Yeah, and I was thinking about the example of Harrisburg. So how did it work in Harrisburg? How did how did it affect individual people who are differentially own things? How did it affect the total amount of revenue for the government?
It's never brought in as an overall tax increase. It's called revenue neutral. Uh, it's the same amount of tax being collected, but in a different manner so that you're harnessing the incentives the way you want it. So for a Harrisburg example, when they shifted 6 times the value, the same amount being collected, but now 6 times more is being collected from the land value compared to the building value. Most property taxes are taxing people too much on their house, on their building value, compared to their land value. Now, most homeowners pay less with this because they have good value in the house compared to the value relative of the land site, right? They have a pretty good land use based on their lot size. Multi-family homes, bigger rental units have a lot more people living on a smaller land site. We want more housing. So this is a real benefit to build multi-unit housing, more residential housing. So they pay less. Homeowners, we gear it so that most homeowners pay the same or less when you make this shift.
good to know.
So if it's
So,
revenue neutral, somebody's paying more. If a lot of people are paying less, so who's paying more?
Okay, I'll give you an example in Pittsburgh. there was a corporation that had a fairly large business, but it employed a lot of people. It had industrial buildings and so on, but it also owned land that was not used along the riverfront. So it had high value riverfront property, and they were paying low taxes on that. And they were paying too much on where they were employing labor. So it shifted so that the riverfront property, they couldn't just monopolize that. They would pay more there and pay less in the areas where they were providing jobs. The who else pays more in Allentown? The people who are against it. The people who own single level parking lots don't like this because you have a big city and you have areas that all they do is put one a single level parking lot. It's a land speculator scheme. You got a little shack where you pay a little money to park. It's a big, these single level parking lots in a high value urban area are not good land use. Maybe build a multi-level parking lot. So those guys don't like it. Anybody that's a speculator. Now there was another 50-acre parcel in the middle of Allentown, and this group had a fair. It was some kind of like a county fair or something, 2 weeks out of the year. And otherwise it was doing nothing. It was vacant. Well, they're only using their 50 acres in the middle of the city, near the middle, so it wasn't really a good land use, but they fought it because they were going to pay more. Well, put your fair outside of the city. The city needs housing. It needs jobs and things that are being produced. Does that make sense?
That helps. Thanks.
Helps. Good. These are all good questions. I think Ellen has a question.
I do. I want to see if I understand this last thing you're talking about. So the land value tax is an incentive for single level parking lots to be turned into multi-level for increased housing. And so I see that. But what happens after to the revenue? Maybe the revenue doesn't change, huh?
No, you start
Oh
getting
yeah,
positive.
the revenue doesn't. I was thinking, what happens then after people build an apartment complex on top of it instead of a single family home and a multi-story parking lot, but the tax would not change. It's just they'd be getting more of what the community needs.
Yeah, and again, you got the zoning in here. I mean, that's a land use decision, whether you want a multi-residential or not. I mean, I
Right.
just went to a housing meeting in my community before this meeting, in fact. And here and elsewhere, they're looking at, oh, we got to change the zoning so single family homeowners can build little cottages in their backyard. Well, if people want to have little cottages in their backyard, let the community decide that. That's a zoning decision.
Right.
That's one way you're going to get a little more housing for people.
Right. You get housing, but the tax on that property wouldn't change because the land is still the land. Is that right?
Exactly. You're getting it now, see?
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's how the incentive works really, really well. And then in terms of, some people ask like, well, you're paying these taxes in the public coffer, public fund. Well, there is a movement for, it's called participatory budgeting. Have you heard of that? I think some WILPF people have.
I have.
Mary Beth has. I think it's a really important, beautiful movement where people come together and they actually decide for about 50% of how their city budget money is spent. I mean, wouldn't that be great on the federal level? Hey, we don't want it to go into these wars. I mean, let the people decide how the people's money's spent. That's sort of a corollary movement. It's another nice thing to do.
It's also a very an exercise in democracy, which is probably why it's not very popular at the federal level. But
Yes, exactly.
Lucille tells us that the um,
Actually, I have a question that follows up
oh,
just
good. Please go
where,
ahead.
yeah, all the shopping malls across the country that are almost empty, the parking lots for them are almost empty. Can you talk about land value taxation in relation to, I don't know, any efforts around those?
Well, I mean, yeah, there's one near where I live. And you think, wow, why can't we use these places for affordable housing? Uh, I guess we got to again look at the incentives. They do often have a lot of land around the buildings. And I think it's just very similar to cities that have most of them do boarded up buildings. The incentives aren't right. So you pay less if you board up your building and just wait to other people work around you. It increases your land value the way it's set up now. And these, it would be good. And I can't think of great movement or examples where these malls are really being put into good use. I know there's a few that I've heard about, but how do we get more of it to happen? I think again, though, that if you have this form of property tax and you say, hey, listen, turn that mall building into affordable housing units. Or if you don't do anything and let it sit vacant, you're going to pay more in your land value for doing nothing with your land. So I really do think this property tax reform to land value tax is in many, many places going to help get those empty malls, which really are land speculation schemes. I mean, what else are they doing? They're just, they have so little taxes on all their land. They're not doing anything with it. Put the fire where it belongs is like, okay, either use it or lose it. Sell it to somebody who wants to put together labor and capital and create some housing in those buildings, in that
We're,
mall.
we're a little bit over time. If anyone has one last burning question that they want to ask, please speak up. I don't see any hands up. I don't hear anyone speaking up. So I think we've come to the end of our time. Alana, it was such a dense presentation. If everyone is like me, they're going to have to watch the recording a couple of times to figure it all out again. But thank you so much for all this information. You've given us a vision of how things could change, and that's always inspiring these days. Improvements and uh, the path to a more caring economy is much needed. So thank you so much for being here with us, Lana, and thank you all for being here and for thinking about this with us.
Well, you're
I
most
just
welcome, and thank you all for being here around this campfire of our computer screens tonight.
Thank
For those
you.
of you who aren't familiar with WILPF, we encourage you to consider joining us. We're a 111-year-old international women's peace organization founded by Jane Addams, who did a lot of work on settlement houses and economic justice along with peace. WILPF has always connected economic justice and democracy and peace, and we continue to do that work today. So think about joining us. We need you.
Thank you to Alana and thank you to Women, Money, and Democracy. I remember Henry George economics from 40 years ago, and I hope that the movement will pick up steam.
And something, if I may quickly, I didn't get the slide in and I kind of forgot, but I do believe that Jane Addams and Henry George knew each other. They were contemporary for a period of time and they greatly respected each other's work.
That's absolutely true. Yes, that's true.
Alana, do you recommend the Henry George School of Social Science?
There's you can sign up for
Resource?
schools in New York and there's have a lot of information online
And do you recommend them as a resource on Henry George?
for educational resource. And then the International Union for Land Value Tax, the IU.org. We have a lot of articles and videos there. Yeah, there's a lot of resources in it. It's a growing movement. finally it's really starting to catch on. We're happy to know that. So wherever you live, if you want to get involved, I can connect you with people in your state or
Alana,
even in your city.
put your email into the chat again, if you wouldn't mind. And I'll just say in closing, I think people are having such a hard time these days, looking at the very severe inequities and unbalanced wealth gap and all of that, that even though this is a hard lift,
Yeah,
it's a lot for people to understand.
I
I
know.
think I think people are probably a little more open to thinking of solutions like this right now than they have been for a very long time, and perhaps it will be a long time before we get to this point again. So, if you're willing to think about it, advocate for these kinds of changes, do be in touch with Alana, and our committee, and hopefully we'll be able to work together. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank
Bye.
you very much.